This morning, two South Simcoe police officers have died after a shooting in Innisfil last night. Our crime analyst Steve Ryan is live at the scene, Somers Boulevard, with the very latest here. Steve, what are you hearing from anybody in that area about what they heard last night?
Well, I spoke with one neighbor who was on their way to work, and they said they heard multiple gunshots at 8 p.m. last night. Now, remember, the two officers responded to a disturbance call at 7:55. Now, a disturbance call is a call where there is an argument or a fight. Usually a neighbor calls it in. The police show up and they investigate and separate the two parties. And if there's an assault charge to be laid, then somebody will be arrested. So the fact that these officers engaged in a gunfight within 5 minutes of being in that house tells me one of two things. They just walked right in to the situation, and this guy was waiting for them with gun drawn, or he came from around the corner or somewhere else in the house where they did not see him. And I say that because there is no suggestion that there was a weapon involved in this initial call. And I say that because the two officers were only two officers. If there was a weapon in that radio call, there would have been more officers attending, and they certainly would not have walked through that front door like those two officers did. So it sounds to me like they were almost ambushed, if you will, Nick.
Okay, that is Steve Ryan live at Innisfil. Steve, appreciate this. I want to give you a live look from Chopper 24 this morning as we are following that police escort that Lisa Morales was just highlighting where it's going to go and the impact this is going to have on traffic. An important situation, of course, though, as this escort is now taking the body of that second fallen officer to the coroner's office at the 401 and Keel. A slow procession indeed. It is going to be traveling northbound along the Don Valley Parkway. Then it'll turn west onto the 401 until it exits a Keel at the coroner's office. So traffic is going to be impacted. You can see here the procession underway, a lead motorcyclist followed by several more vehicles. And just take a look, as these pictures emerge from Chopper 24 now, and as the camera pulls out, you can see the length of this procession, the pace of this procession, and of course, how somber this is. This is just such an horrific day for members of any police service right across Ontario, let alone members of the South Simcoe, Police Service, of course, who, of course, are dealing now with the loss of two of their own officers. We will continue to track this procession as it makes its way to the coroner's office. And let's take you to the coroner's office outside anyway, live this hour, where again, police are gathering outside. This has really become a kind of a grim tradition when an officer's body is brought here for examination. We've been showing you already police from various jurisdictions around the region already there lining up to pay their respects. Again, just for another time in just the past month, another fallen officer here. Now, Premier Doug Ford has tweeted, "I'm heartbroken to learn that two South Simcoe police officers were killed in the line of duty. We are praying for the officers' families and all the police officers who put their lives on the line to protect our communities." And for more on this morning, we're joined by CTV's public safety analyst, former OPP Commissioner Chris Lewis is live now. Chris, let's talk about this tradition of driving fallen officers from, in this case, St. Mike's Hospital up to the coroner's office. Where did this begin, and what does it mean to police officers?
I don't know exactly when it began, Nick. I certainly remember it more in terms of fallen soldiers overseas that were shipped back to Canada, to Trenton, and then brought to Toronto. Certainly it has occurred with some regularity of late. I think it's just about kind of giving them that last escort from the hospital to the coroner's building, where of course there'll be autopsies and a lot to do there yet. Just out of respect for the officer and the department. It's kind of that honor of escorting them, so to speak. You can't save them now, obviously, which is tragic, but they'll do their best to honor them at this moment.
Yeah, it's a very powerful scene. There's no doubt about that, Chris. And I want to talk to you, you're the former OPP commissioner. What is this day like for, in this case, Chief Van Dyke of South Simcoe Police, where he's now dealing with not one, but two deaths of members of his police service? How do you handle these days like this? Are you talking to family, talking to officers? What is going on?
He'll be doing all of that for sure, Nick. I mean, it's indescribable, the feeling that goes through you when you deal with one. I never had to, deal with families for two at once like that. So it's double the pain. I mean, he's feeling for his deceased officers. He's feeling for all the colleagues, the comm center staff, and many others. But having to sit and deal with the families is, just hard to even imagine. Just an awful situation. But he'll do it with, leadership and respect and get their wishes in terms of things they may need in the coming days and weeks and months.
Difficult indeed, and really powerful as we watch this procession unfold, seeing all those officers standing outside their cruisers at attention as the fallen officer goes by here. Chris, I wonder, in your experience, in your decades of experience as a police officer, what's that day like as an officer? What's going through your mind? Do you remember that feeling and those thoughts when you found out a fellow officer, whether it was in your own service or just, like South Simcoe, a Toronto officer is probably thinking something now too?
Well, absolutely. I mean, every police service in Canada, particularly as you get closer to the GTA, closer to South Simcoe, York and the OPP immediately surround them, Barrie Police and others. It just, the closer it gets, the more it comes to home. They'll be devastated. It's just a loss of a colleague, whether they ever knew the two officers or not. It's like the loss of a family member. I've been there. I've been there when the officers were killed. I've been had to deal with families of officers under my command that were killed, and very, very difficult circumstances. I remember at one and talking to the officers involved in a group that were actually putting the parade together, and I said, we're all going to cry at some point, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I did. When I left, I sat in the car on the side of the road, bawled my eyes out.
Yeah, I really appreciate that honesty, Chris, indeed. And, these are never easy days. You're never going to get used to something like this. But what we are not used to, clearly, or I can't remember it personally, is the last time two officers were killed in one instance like this. We hear of ones, and we obviously don't like hearing about them at all. But do you recall a situation like this where two officers were killed in the line of duty like this?
Yeah, definitely, Nick. Toronto Police has had them. I remember Irwin and Sinclair, a very famous case in Toronto some years back in the early 70s, I believe, and others. The OPP have had two at once a few times. In Mayerthorpe, Alberta, there was 4 Mounties killed, including one that was a rookie, just started, and then 3 in Moncton some years after that. So it's not without precedent, but it is relatively rare. I can only think of a handful off the top of my head.
And we're watching now, we're seeing this procession approaching the Don Valley Parkway here as it is going to head up to the Don Valley Parkway and then to the 401 along to the coroner's office. Indeed. Chris, I want to talk to you about the fact that this, as our crime analyst Steve Ryan has been highlighting, this was a disturbance call. 2 officers arrive, go into a house at a disturbance call. We don't know, of course, what happened once they got inside that house. But as Steve has been saying, this is an example of how policing can just, go from 0 to 100 in a heartbeat.
For sure. And in many cases, the one I spoke of, Irwin and Sinclair years ago, was some sort of disturbance in an apartment building, and they were both killed in the hallway, and many others like that. So what is a disturbance? Is it a domestic dispute? Is it just somebody loud and making noise and, threatening someone or whatever? It's really hard to define until we know more details, and we won't for some time, given the SIU involvement. But officers obviously felt safe going in there, safe as you could be. They weren't expecting fire, obviously, or they would have backed off and called in more resources. So they went into that building or residence and were met with gunfire. So was that a planned thing? Was it just there was a disturbance, somebody had a gun and saw police and started shooting? Yeah. There's so many details to determine yet. But it certainly shows that a disturbance you don't think has necessarily a call where 2 cops are going to be killed. Yeah. You never know. You don't know when you stop a car. You don't know when you go to a shoplifter or a domestic dispute.
Chris, I have about 30 seconds left, just kind of really quickly here. Does it change the time frame at all about when we'll get information based on the fact that, as far as we know, the only suspect involved in this has also died? Does that change the time frame of information?
No, SIU only allows the police to give out one press release. They'll do that at 1 o'clock this afternoon. We'll hear as many details as we can then, but then it'll be up to SIU after that.
All right, CTV's public safety analyst Chris Lewis, appreciate your time. I know we'll turn to you several more times throughout the day here, but thanks for kicking off the conversation here on Breakfast.
Thank you.